In 1848, a 13-pound iron rod shot through Phineas Gage's skull like a bullet. He survived, but what happened next shocked the world more than the accident itself. Scientists today are still studying his case 175 years later. They've discovered something terrifying about what the rod destroyed inside his brain. The damage changed who he was as a person. His friends said he became no longer Gage. Modern brain scans reveal the rod destroyed connections that made him human. What scientists found will make you question everything about your own mind. Phineas Gage was born in July 1823 in Grafton County, New Hampshire. His family lived a simple life, working hard to survive on a small farm. His parents, Jesse Eaton Gage and Hannah Trussell Gage, had 5 children, and Phineas was their first. The land was rough, the winters harsh, and the work never-ending. Phineas grew up helping his family, learning the value of hard labor early on. This was a time when America was beginning to change, as the Industrial Revolution started to spread, even to small farming communities. Despite having little formal schooling, Phineas learned to read and write. That was rare for farm boys in the 1830s, when many children had to skip school to help with planting or harvesting. His ability to read and write showed that his family saw the importance of education, even if it meant working harder to make up for lost time on the farm. These skills helped him later in life, as he worked with dangerous tools and communicated with his bosses. Phineas became familiar with explosives while still young. Clearing rocky fields with gunpowder was common in New England, and local mining added to his experience. By his 20s, he was already skilled at handling explosives, a talent that made him valuable on railroad construction crews. He even had his own custom-made tamping iron, a heavy metal rod designed for packing explosives into holes. This iron would later play a shocking role in his story. People described Phineas as strong and tough. He stood about 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 150 pounds. His muscles were well developed, and he had what was called a nervo-bilious temperament, a mix of energy and endurance. His doctor, John Martin Harlow, said Phineas had an iron will as well as an iron frame. His strength helped him not just in daily work, but in earning respect and leading his crew. His health was remarkable too. He rarely got sick, something unusual in an age when many people struggled with disease. In the early 1840s, Phineas left farming behind to join the booming railroad industry. The work was dangerous, but it promised better pay and a chance to be part of something big. By July 1848, he was working on the Hudson River Railroad near Cortlandt Town, New York. The job was huge and risky, requiring skill with explosives and the ability to keep large crews safe while blasting through rock. By September 1848, Phineas had become the blasting foreman for the Rutland and Burlington Railroad. He was in charge of one of the most dangerous parts of building railroads, using gunpowder to clear rock. This job needed not just skill, but also leadership. He had to make sure every step was done right, because even a small mistake could mean disaster. Phineas may have even worked as an independent contractor, showing his confidence and his boss's trust in him. He was only 25, but already known as one of the best in his field. His custom tamping iron showed his pride in his work. It was 3.8 feet long, 1.25 inches thick, and weighed 13.25 pounds. Made in Cavendish, Vermont, it was part of his identity. He kept it with him always and called it "my iron bar." It was both a tool and a symbol of his expertise. Phineas was known as the most capable and efficient foreman on the crew. His bosses praised his energy, discipline, and smart decisions. His men respected him for being fair and focused. He avoided drinking and was dedicated to his job. His work was dangerous, but he kept his team safe and got the job done right. It was September 13, 1848. The time was exactly 4:30 p.m. Near Cavendish, Vermont, Phineas Gage was leading his railroad crew through a normal day of blasting rock. Gage was just 25 years old. He was smart, reliable, and trusted with dangerous work. His job that day was to prepare explosives to clear the path for new track. The task was familiar: drill a hole in the rock, pour in gunpowder, add a fuse, then cover it all with sand before tamping it down with an iron rod. But something went terribly wrong. Maybe it was a passing thought. Maybe it was a quick glance at his men. For just a second, Gage lost focus. He forgot the most important step. He didn't pour in the sand that would block sparks. Instead, he took the 43-inch iron rod, which weighed 13.25 pounds, and began tamping straight onto the gunpowder. The rod scraped against the rock. A spark flew. The gunpowder exploded beneath him. The blast was instant. The iron rod turned into a deadly spear. It shot into Gage's face, right under his left cheekbone. It destroyed his left eye. It ripped through his brain's frontal lobe. It tore through the top of his skull and came out the other side. The force was beyond belief. Bits of his brain were visible. Some reports said brain matter came out when he vomited, but somehow Gage did not die. The rod kept going. It flew through the air and landed 82 feet behind him. That's farther than the length of a city bus. It was found lying on the ground, bloody and covered with pieces of brain. People couldn't believe what they saw. A heavy iron rod had passed through his head and kept flying that far. Yet Gage was still alive. When Dr. Edward H. Williams arrived just 30 minutes later, he found Gage sitting up, awake, and talking. Gage even greeted him calmly, saying, "Doctor, here is business enough for you." His brain was clearly visible through a large hole in his head, yet he was alert and could describe what had happened. Surviving the accident was only the beginning of his battle. Gage lost a huge amount of blood, leaving him weak and pale. In those first few days, things took a dark turn. The wound became badly infected. His brain tissue began to rot, and he developed a severe brain infection that filled his head with pus. At one point, doctors drained nearly 240 milliliters of pus from an abscess in his forehead. Gage slipped into a half-conscious state for more than 2 weeks. He could barely speak, only answering with short, simple words when forced. The infection was so bad that fungi grew from his injured brain. Doctors had to apply nitrate of silver and keep cold compresses on his head non-stop. No one expected him to survive such horrors, but somehow Gage held on. His treatment was as strange as his survival. The doctors gave him calomel, a medicine made with mercury, hoping it would fight the infection. They also applied beaver oil to his wounds, trusting in old remedies. They cleaned and dressed the wound many times a day, always leaving part of it open so it could drain. Day by day, against all odds, Gage's strength returned. The infection began to clear, and his body slowly healed. It was hard to believe, but these simple, risky treatments helped save his life. By mid-November, just 2 months after the accident, people in Cavendish were shocked to see Gage walking through town. He could climb stairs, walk without help, and seemed eager to return to work. His left eye was gone, and the scars on his head told the story of what he had been through. But his energy and strength amazed everyone. He even left Vermont and worked as a stagecoach driver in South America. For a man who had come so close to death, his recovery seemed almost magical. Even more surprising was how much of Gage's mind and body still worked. Despite losing a large part of the front of his brain, he could still move, speak, and remember. His muscles worked. His speech was clear. His memory stayed sharp enough for him to explain his accident in detail right after it happened. Modern science shows that the damaged part of his brain controlled personality and social behavior, not movement or memory. This is why Gage could still function, even though he became a different man in how he acted. His case became famous because it taught doctors how the brain works. Phineas Gage was a man everyone trusted. His employers called him the most capable foreman they had. He was calm, fair, and always showed respect to others. His team liked him because he kept things running smoothly, even when the work was dangerous and stressful. He had great judgment and could handle tough tasks like blasting rock and leading large crews. People admired how balanced he was in both his mind and his emotions. But everything changed after one terrible day, and those who knew him said he was no longer the same man. Dr. John Harlow, the doctor who treated him, watched these changes closely. Gage, once kind and respectful, started swearing in ways that shocked everyone. He became rude and impatient. He ignored advice and did whatever he wanted, no matter how reckless. He would come up with big plans, but he never followed through. He stopped caring about how he acted around others. The man who had once led workers with ease was now unpredictable and hard to be around. His friends and family were heartbroken. They said he was no longer Gage. Before the accident, Gage had been the kind of employee any company would want. His bosses trusted him with important jobs, but after his injury, they refused to hire him back. He was no longer reliable. His bad temper, his wild behavior, and his lack of control made him impossible to manage. He could not do the careful, responsible work he had once done so well. His downfall showed the world how damage to the brain could destroy a person's ability to work and live as they once had. One of the saddest parts of Gage's story was how his mind and body no longer matched. He still had the strength of a grown man, but his thinking and self-control were like those of a child. Dr. Harlow said he had the animal passions of a strong man, but the mind of a child. Gage would get angry over small things. He made foolish choices without thinking of what might happen. He could not stay focused or finish what he started. This made him hard to deal with at work and in daily life. His case taught doctors that the frontal lobe helps control emotions, decisions, and behavior. Without it, a person can lose the very qualities that make them human. Those closest to him said it best. They said he was no longer Gage. This wasn't just about a few bad habits or changes in mood. It meant that the man they loved and respected was gone. What was left was someone they didn't recognize. His case shocked people in the 1800s and made them rethink what makes a person who they are. Today, the phrase "no longer Gage" is still used to describe how brain injuries can completely change a person's identity. The iron rod that destroyed Gage's left frontal lobe had done more than just injure him. It had changed the core of his being. At the time, no one understood what different parts of the brain did, but Gage's case gave some of the first clues. Many years later, scientists studied his skull again using modern tools. They found that the rod had destroyed the ventromedial part of his frontal lobe. This part of the brain is key to mixing emotions with clear thinking and good choices. In the late 1840s, Phineas Gage became one of the strangest and most talked about attractions in New York City. After surviving an accident in 1848 that sent a 13.25-pound iron rod through his head, Gage could no longer work as a railroad foreman. With few choices left, he joined P.T. Barnum's American Museum. The museum was famous for drawing thousands of visitors each day. It filled 5 floors with wax figures, live animals, and people who amazed or shocked the public. Gage stood out even in this world of oddities. His survival, with part of his brain damaged and his skull scarred, made him a living wonder. People paid to see him up close, curious about how any man could live through such a terrible injury. Barnum, always clever with words, advertised Gage as the only living man with a hole in his head. This simple phrase was enough to fill the museum with people eager to see him. Gage would stand before crowds, smiling, while holding the iron rod that had torn through his skull. His scar and the rod told the story better than any words. It was not just his survival that amazed people, but the clear proof of what had happened to him. The phrase "hole in his head" followed him everywhere. It made him famous and turned him into a mix of science case and circus act. Gage's shows were not just about standing still. He wanted people to truly understand what had happened. Sometimes he brought out an extra skull with holes in it. He would push his iron rod through the model to show how the rod had passed through his own head. The crowds gasped as they watched. It felt real, shocking, and impossible to forget. People did not just see Gage, they saw the violence of the accident come to life before their eyes. Gage was no longer just a man on display. He became part of the show, helping people imagine the horror of that day. But the experience went even further. Gage sold pamphlets telling his full story. Visitors could take home the tale of the man who had cheated death. And for an extra 10 cents, something even more surprising awaited them. Gage would let curious guests part his hair and look at the soft, beating tissue where his brain had once been shielded by bone. Some people even touched the spot. This made the visit personal and unforgettable. The chance to see and feel a living wound blurred the line between learning and entertainment. Wherever Gage went, his iron rod went with him. It measured 3 feet 7 inches and weighed more than 13 pounds. Gage called it "my iron bar," and it never left his side. Whether he was on stage, traveling, or even later working as a stagecoach driver in Chile, the rod stayed with him. It was more than a reminder of his accident. It became part of who he was, a symbol of what he had lived through and of his strength. After the terrible accident in 1848, Phineas Gage's life changed forever. Once a respected railroad foreman, Gage could no longer return to his old job. His personality had changed so much that his friends said he was no longer Gage. He became restless and wandered across New England, trying to find work. He took jobs on farms, though he struggled to last a full day. He worked as a carriage driver, lifting heavy luggage, handling horses, and collecting fares. For about a year and a half in the early 1850s, he worked at Currier's livery stable at the Dartmouth Inn in Hanover, New Hampshire. But nothing seemed to last. People described him as fitful, rude, and prone to swearing. His outbursts made it hard to keep any job for long. His life felt unstable, as if he didn't quite fit in anywhere. Yet something unexpected happened during these difficult years. Gage developed a deep love for horses. He found comfort working with them, and he seemed to have a natural talent for it. Driving a carriage was not easy. It took strength, quick thinking, and careful control. The driver had to guide several horses at once, prepare them for the road, load passengers' bags, and keep everyone safe. Gage handled these tasks with surprising skill. In New Hampshire, he worked as a carriage driver for over a year and a half. Later, he went to Chile. There, he spent nearly 7 years driving stagecoaches through the dangerous mountain passes between Valparaiso and Santiago. These roads were risky, and the job demanded constant focus and care. Gage's success at this work showed that even after his injury, he still had abilities people didn't expect. But despite these moments of success, Gage's troubles never fully went away. The damage to his brain had changed his nature. He became quick to anger and struggled to follow plans. He jumped from job to job. After losing his railroad position, no employer kept him long. His behavior often led to him being fired. He even ended up displayed as a curiosity in Barnum's American Museum in New York City. His family and friends pulled away from him, unable to recognize the man he had become. Still, over time, his worst traits seemed to soften. This change may have helped him do well as a stagecoach driver in Chile. He was able to hold that job for years, something that once seemed impossible. One of the most touching parts of Gage's later life was how he acted with children. He loved to entertain his nephews and nieces. He would tell them grand stories about adventures and heroic escapes. These tales were often made up, but the children didn't mind. They were thrilled by his fabulous recitals of wonderful feats. Gage seemed to find true joy in these moments. His stories showed his imagination, and perhaps also a tendency to mix fact and fiction, something common in people with injuries like his. Phineas Gage's story did not end with his terrible accident. In August 1852, he surprised everyone by starting a new life in Chile. He was invited to work as a stagecoach driver on one of the most important and dangerous routes in the country. This was the Valparaiso to Santiago route. It connected the busy port city with the capital. The job was not offered to just anyone. It was for drivers who were skilled, calm, and trustworthy. Many in the United States thought Gage was no longer fit for serious work, but in Chile, people believed in him. They saw that he could handle big responsibilities. They trusted him with passengers, cargo, and their safety. Gage's daily work was hard and demanding. He had to control 6 strong horses on every trip. The distance between Valparaiso and Santiago was about 100 miles. The trip took around 13 hours in one direction. The road was full of dangers. The path crossed mountains. The weather could change fast. Bandits were always a risk. Gage had to stay alert and focused the entire time. He had to keep the horses healthy and moving. He had to make sure the stagecoach arrived on time. His success in this job showed that he could think clearly and work under pressure. The job was proof that he had recovered far more than people believed. The most amazing part of this chapter in Gage's life was how long it lasted. From 1852 to 1859, he worked as a stagecoach driver. That was 7 full years. The job was tough on both the body and the mind. This was the longest steady job Gage held after his accident. Many stories said he could not keep a job because of his changed personality, but his work in Chile showed something different. He showed strength, courage, and the will to succeed. He proved that he could do demanding work, even far from home. Phineas Gage had defied the odds for years, but by the middle of 1859, his strength began to fail. For nearly 7 years, he had worked as a stagecoach driver in Chile. It was a tough job that demanded sharp focus, quick reflexes, and endless stamina. Gage managed it all, despite the terrible injury he had suffered years before. But as that year wore on, his health took a sudden and serious turn. He fell ill again and again. His body grew weaker with each episode. People who knew him spoke of his many ill turns that final year in Valparaiso. His mother later said he had failed very much since he left New Hampshire. The harsh climate of Chile, along with the damage his brain had suffered, made these illnesses far more dangerous. At last, he had to give up the work he had clung to and abandon the life he had built so far from home. Late in 1859, Gage returned to San Francisco. He traveled by steamer, and the change in him was startling. His mother called him feeble. The strong, determined man who had left years earlier was now frail, thin, and exhausted. His mother and sister, who had moved from New Hampshire to California, took him in. They cared for him as he tried to recover. Friends and family saw how badly he had declined. The damage done by his years of struggle and sickness in Chile was clear to all. Moving to San Francisco wasn't just a fresh start. It was a last chance at survival. His family's support gave him comfort and stability during these hard months, but his condition continued to worsen. Still, Gage's spirit wasn't broken. After some rest, he managed a short recovery. He was eager to work again, to feel useful. He took jobs as a farm laborer in Santa Clara County, just south of San Francisco. The work was hard. Farming demanded strength and endurance, things Gage had lost much of, but he pushed himself. For a few months, he moved from farm to farm, doing what he could. Reports said he was anxious to work. It was a small victory for him, but it didn't last. His health problems returned. His body could no longer keep up. Even so, his efforts showed how determined he was and how tragic his slow decline had become. Then came the turning point. In February 1860, while sitting at dinner with his family, Gage had his first epileptic seizure. It happened suddenly. It was violent. His family watched in shock and fear as he convulsed. This seizure was the start of a terrible final chapter. The damage done by the iron rod all those years before had caught up with him in a devastating way. Back then, doctors didn't understand adult epilepsy, especially when caused by brain injury. There was no treatment that could help. From that day, Gage's seizures came more often and grew worse. They stripped him of the small gains he had made. He could no longer work or even care for himself. By the spring of 1860, Gage's life had changed completely. The seizures came without warning, leaving him drained in body and mind. He tried to work, but he couldn't hold any job for long. Witnesses said he grew restless, often leaving jobs or switching from one to another. The damage inside his brain was now controlling his life. By May, he was almost entirely in his mother's care. On May 20th, 1860, he suffered a series of severe convulsions. He died the next day. Phineas Gage was just 36 years old. His long, hard fight had come to a tragic end. Phineas Gage's story is one of the most haunting and fascinating in medical history. He died on May 21st, 1860, at just 36 years old. 12 years earlier, in 1848, he had survived an accident that seemed impossible. A 13.25-pound iron rod shot through his skull, changing his life forever. The rod entered his cheek, passed behind his left eye, and exited through the top of his head. Against all odds, Gage lived, but the damage it caused slowly cast a long shadow over his life. In the final days, Gage was back with his family in San Francisco. There, he suffered from violent seizures that lasted for 36 hours. These were not random. They were caused by the brain trauma he had endured so many years earlier. Medicine at the time did not fully understand how brain injuries led to conditions like epilepsy. Doctors could only watch as his body failed. There was no autopsy after his death, so some details about his condition were lost forever. But Dr. John Harlow, who had treated Gage from the start, was certain. The seizures that ended Gage's life were the final blow from the iron rod that had pierced his brain. What made Gage's case so famous was not just his survival, it was what came after. Before the accident, Gage was known as a hard-working, dependable man. Afterward, his friends said he was no longer Gage. He became reckless, rude, and quick to anger. His change shocked everyone. This was the first time science could clearly see that damage to the frontal lobes could change a person's character. Before Gage, many thought the frontal lobes did very little. Dr. Harlow's notes showed how wrong that was. His records became the foundation for future studies. In time, other doctors and scientists, like David Ferrier, built on Gage's case. Ferrier's experiments on animals proved that the frontal lobes controlled behavior. Gage's tragic experience helped lead to the birth of neuropsychiatry and even early brain surgeries meant to treat mental illness. Even after so many years, Gage's story kept offering new lessons. In 2012, researchers at UCLA used modern CT scans and MRI data to recreate what had happened inside his skull. What they found was shocking. The rod had destroyed more than 10% of Gage's white matter. This white matter was the brain's communication system, linking the frontal lobe to other areas. The damage was much greater than anyone had guessed. The scans showed that it was not just the gray matter that mattered. The broken connections inside his brain explained why Gage changed so much. His case became proof that injuries could harm not just one part of the brain, but the entire network that lets the brain work as a whole.